Welcome everyone for our latest installment of Lessons from the Leaderboard to Leadership. I'm going to wait as we go live here on YouTube and LinkedIn, both. Okay, so we're live on LinkedIn, so we can keep going. So welcome to, like I said, this 9th installment of Lessons from the Leaderboard to Leadership. Today, I have a very special guest, Gayle Noakes. Is that how you say your last name, Gayle?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct. Thanks.
Okay, it's not complicated. Okay. And Gayle is an expert. She's going to give her background in just a minute, but she is not a sales leader. And she is our first non-sales leader on this episode series for a reason. So Gayle and I met at a networking event, and she stood up and she was speaking about the rise of a manufacturing sale leader, not sales leader. See, it's like, it just kind of flows, Gayle. But your niche is my niche in manufacturing. So Rise Up Consulting, we help salespeople go from salespeople to sales leaders. And you do the same thing with helping those frontline leaders at manufacturing companies, and then we strengthen leadership pipelines. So as Gayle was talking, I went, oh my gosh, we need to talk. So we met for coffee and we kind of nerded out on what we do. And I thought you'd be such a great guest for some of the parallels in this as leadership. The specifics are different in sales leadership and manufacturing leadership, but you have such a process and such a background. And I thought your perspective would help people watching this and watching the replay. So the people this is for are emerging sales leaders, but also executive leaders at organizations who right now need to be recruiting better people, retaining that talent, and having an impact on, you would probably say, productivity in manufacturing. I say revenue. They both have an impact on revenue, right, as far as that goes. So Gayle, can you give us a quick background? And then you're going to be talking to us today on 3 main topics, which I'm very excited about, but individuals as doers, and then what changes as they get into leadership, and then beyond that, these key aspects that leaders can work on. And I'm really excited to see if what you say parallels to what I have in my Leaderboard to Leadership program, working with Chris. I'll either know I'm good at doing a good job, or if I need to add a few things as well. So I'm kind of doing this for me and my audience and your audience. But welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Just a couple comments on my background is I spent about 20 years of my career in manufacturing, doing a variety of jobs. I was a quality engineer, so spent a lot of time with engineers, but also spent many hours out on the production floor working with hand in hand with production operators and supervisors. So I've seen firsthand those folks trying to move from being that doer to that leader, and that's what we'll be talking about today. I also spent about 14 years as the Chief Learning Officer for now CLA, which is a national accounting firm. So also experienced some of those same changes going from an accountant to leading a industry group within accounting. And so a lot of what I do in my business is really focused around helping supervisors in manufacturing to become successful leaders.
And I love that. Can we riff on this for just a second? So in sales, I did a survey in March of 2021, and 80% of sales leaders told me they got 0 training once they got promoted. Do you see that number in manufacturing as well? Like, okay, here's your role, here you go. Like, or what would you kind of equate? Because I think people go, that makes sense. But when executives actually see that, they go, we need to train our people or they're not going to be. So what do you sort of see on your end in manufacturing?
Well, I don't have a specific number, but that is exactly what happens in a lot of cases. I think because these folks that are being promoted, they see them as the stars. They're great at getting things done. And so as they think of them, well, now they can, lead a group and help them get things done. We just don't always think about quite the transition they have to go through and how different their role really is. I think more training would happen if people would kind of think that that's really a bigger change, more significant for these people who are becoming leaders than they think it is.
It's a big change. Okay, so can you talk to us about you just said it, the doers. Can you talk about that? Like, because what makes people successful gets them promoted, and they've,
Absolutely. Yeah, just as I was saying, these are usually the individuals who, work really hard, are very good at taking direction, great at getting things done. They'll, see problems or things and tackle them and fix them, so people, the production leaders really see these folks as instrumental at getting things done, at solving the problem. So they're very much, individual contributors. They put their energy and their mind toward making things work. In the manufacturing world, they're usually in that case working with machines and getting a lot of that done, working with schedules and making things happen.
And then how does that transition? I could talk about this with you. There's mindset shifts, there's technical shifts.
Right.
So what, because I really believe, well, in sales, this is why I think this is so important, where this first step, you specialize in manufacturing as well. My philosophy is we lose so many great leaders because we unintentionally set them up to fail. And they go, I don't want to they don't get this transition. If they don't find wins right away, they go, I'll just keep being a doer. I feel really good being a doer. And it just, but this first transition, you master this first transition, the leadership pipeline is stronger. Right. They don't make those bad habits, right? Like, it's just their effectiveness of, you just get them on the right habits right away. And that continues as they move up in manufacturing, as they keep going up the chain of command. But let's give me your vast knowledge about this transition, because I'm here for it.
Yeah. And I think, as we talked about, Rebecca, I think it is very similar in all roles. I mean, in my background, I've worked with manufacturing, engineers, sales, accountants, and see many of the same things. So, first of all, I think there's a couple key components. One is when you move from a doer to more of a leader, there's a whole set of roles that you take on that you've never had before. So they are like, instead of taking work direction, you're giving work direction, which is a whole different ballgame. They have to make sure the work gets done, but in a different way, not doing it themselves, but helping others get it done. They need to coach. They need to train. Training, they might have done some in their role, but they're now responsible that it happens for their group. Giving feedback, listening, all of those things. That's a whole new role that really scares a lot of new leaders. And I think one thing that's really important is that most of these new roles are a lot less tangible than they were as a doer. When you're a doer, an engineer, you're getting a project done and physically out on the floor. Production, you're actually getting product made. Sales, you're meeting your sales numbers. And these kinds of roles that we talked about, giving good work direction, feedback, you don't have a concrete product. And it's really hard to know, did I do that well? And is it done? And that, again, a lot of people who are pretty concrete individual contributors really struggle to know, did I do that right? Was I supposed to do? So I think that lack of having it being very tangible is really hard for them. So I give you one example that always kind of cracks me up. One of the manufacturing companies I worked for, we had a new leader, and he was supposed to be doing some of these things in charting, and inevitably I'd go out on the production floor and I'd see him driving the forklift. And I'd say, Joe, what are you doing? And he'd say, well, the material handler couldn't make it. He's sick. So my guys need material. So I'm getting the material. And, that's all very nice. And yes, he's got to keep production going. But again, it's when I think the things they're trying to do are less tangible and they're not comfortable with them and they don't know, all of us have the habit, we're going to revert back to what we already know, which is making the line move.
That point right there, Gayle, is so important, because when you're in a new role and you're doing something you've never done, you don't have the confidence you had. Like, when you got things done, whether because the product was good, productivity and manufacturing. I worked in a paper mill my year between senior year of high school and college. So I actually know what it's like in manufacturing a little bit. Like, I can actually picture, like, it feels really good to like be doing things with your hands and you can see it. But when you go to that next thing, you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. Your confidence takes a hit. So you go, let me prove why I deserve this promotion by doing my old job really well. Let me work on my confidence. That thing. And for sales leaders, that's going back and closing sales for their people. Right. It's but what you just said about that, I'm having those conversations daily. Like, yeah, you're helping, but that's not your job anymore. So now you're creating a whole big backup. But I'm glad you talk about that, because it's the same. Okay, keep going.
Well, the other thing I was going to say is what nowadays makes it even more confusing is a lot of leaders are what we're calling working managers. So they're not only a leader of a group, but they also have some of their own work to do, because again, times are stretched and it's hard to have a leader all they're doing is leading, and they also have work to do. But that makes it even more confusing, because now you're still being an individual contributor and a leader. And so you're trying to learn these new skills and apply them, but also use your old skills, which you just, said too, that you're comfortable with. And so, that adds to the confusion as well.
This is funny, because you're totally right. Every expert says, don't be an individual contributor and a leader. And I call that the ugly middle child of the sales world. It's the ugly middle child of manufacturing too, it sounds like. But it's so difficult to do both of those. And in sales, we say a confused prospect doesn't act, doesn't buy. Confused employees don't act. Confused when you go, what should I be doing now? How should I be using? And time management is the number one struggle for sales leaders. And I imagine it's probably the same in manufacturing as well. And that focus. So I love that you focus on that, because it's real challenging. So what do you recommend? And I know I'm not going to get a straight answer from you, because you're very smart and you don't give like blatant advice without knowing the specifics. But how quickly would you want that transition to be met? Like, because there is no getting around it sometimes. Like, maybe the manufacturer just like, we're not big enough to have you in leadership yet. How do you recommend how long that transition should last? Because it's
I think, I'm going to use the old, it depends. I think it really depends on the situation and the individual, and actually their manager. Because one of the things I think is key in moving from that individual contributor, or even halfway, is really understanding the expectations of the role. And that always sounds so basic, but it's so key. I work with groups and they'll say, well, we also need training for our leads. And, we usually report up to supervisors. And I'm saying, well, what's the role? What are you expecting with the leads? And, I get a vast array. One is training all the way to, well, they're mini supervisors and they're dealing with even performance. So different companies and different bosses per se have different expectations of these new supervisors. Part of it may be just really helping get things moving along and making sure if somebody's sick that they get, somebody's on making the machine run. But most companies want them to evolve to being the kinds of leaders we were talking about, where they're coaching, they're giving direction, they're making sure everything's working. and being able to even get to the point of, developing their people. So I think the reality of the working manager is there, just as lean as we have to run these days. I think the key behind it is be really clear on the expectations behind those two different roles.
Yep. I always say new role, new rules. And what are those rules? There are those expectations, but
Yep.
it does need to be, there needs to be an onboarding converse, even if that transition, like you haven't, like you do your HR paperwork as a new employee and they tell you how to get into the computer system. It would be a little different how to work the machine in manufacturing. Let me put my manufacturing hat on here. They could go through the OSHA, right? Here's safety regulations. I had to learn how to drive a forklift. Like they go through all of that.
Yep.
What would that be for that first line supervisor or that frontline sales leader? And companies go, ooh, we have not. Or what you said, executive, because you ask executives, I do too. Okay, what are their expectations? And they want them to be like super duper heroes. And you're like, they can't do everything. What are the main ones? And I think this is what they hire you and I for, particularly, to help them with that. But at a most basic, just go through, what do you want? Is that aligned with the rest of the leadership team with that?
Okay. And what's interesting is what sometimes even makes it harder, like it can be manufacturing or it can be sales and engineering, as they make that shift, a couple of things often. One, because they're one of their star performers, they're losing that person on the line. So now you usually have to bring in a less experienced person and train them. So they're losing one of the really key people as they try to take on this group. Secondly, often as we promote within, which is, I think, a wonderful thing to do, often immediately they are supervising their peers. And we all know that's about the hardest thing in the world to do. So they've got a couple additional things on them to work through.
This is all so smart, and I love it. Yep.
So if we can, let's talk about a couple of things that I think are basic to do to get this started that really get in the way of new leaders. We talked about expectations already. That's always really first. And the second one you already mentioned, Rebecca, actually, and it's something I don't think people always think of right away, but it is time management. They have gone from, at least in manufacturing, they're going by a schedule. They really know how long things take. It's pretty concrete. Suddenly, because I worked with, some new leaders, and all of a sudden, one of them brought me to his desk and showed me he had 3,000 emails and he doesn't know what to do. Suddenly, they've got emails. They have more meetings. They have, they have to develop their own schedule. It's not just given to them. Now they have projects, and sometimes they're leading project teams. They have to make sure. They still have to make sure production and scheduling is all in sync. So how to manage all of those things, I think, is one of the first pieces that they kind of develop a process. Are they going to, do it, through a calendar, through Outlook, and how much time should they allot to the various things, knowing that their day will still blow up often, but all of a sudden they've got way more time in meetings and things, and then they get action items, and just how to manage all that is really difficult. For manufacturing supervisors, I sometimes recommend something as simple as get a notebook, and carry that every place you go. I had one group, because a lot of manufacturing people, at least, they think they can keep it all in their head, and they get to this role and there's absolutely not. I worked in one plant, and I was a quality engineer, and I had to walk through the whole plant to go across the parking lot to the office building where we had meetings. And it was routine that I'd get stopped 5 times, by people asking a question, or can I get this, or what about that? And man, if I didn't have that notebook, I wouldn't remember any of that stuff. So As simple as it sounds, some of them just start with just write everything down like that. And then at the end of the day, you can see what you did and didn't do. And at least it's a start.
Yep. It's, it's so important. I say that I was actually just talking about this. I was on site with, a leadership team a couple weeks ago, like 30 leaders, and it was all about time and energy management. And some of their, it's not just salespeople, it's like a bunch of people. I said, when you work with your hands, when you work in manufacturing, you know how long a task should take you.
Right.
Okay, this sales talk should take me 45 minutes. When I'm with this client, it might be a 3-hour long, wine and dine and that kind of thing. But when you work with your mind, you don't know how long some tasks should take. And it's okay, should this meeting take me 45 minutes? Should it take me 4 hours? Could the meeting be an email? Could it add to my 3,000 emails? But that's really tricky. So I'm glad that made your priority list as well, because you're right, that if people don't think about that differently, it's challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing I see a lot that people struggle with is, especially from moving, as a doer, you take the responsibility, and these people are great at that, taking the responsibility to get things done and do it themselves. And so as a leader, they start with that same habit of, they feel, they're great people, they feel really responsible, and they try to do it all themselves. And they're going to fail, because you cannot possibly do this job all by yourself. And that is a real thought shift. So a couple things that we talk about is, first of all, kind of think about, what are you best at? What are your strengths? What are you really good at? And then figure out, how do you start enrolling other people and their skills? And really think about doing this job together. An example in my past is, as I mentioned, I worked for an accounting firm as a chief learning officer. When I started, they never had one. There was 2 people from the company who joined me as part of my team. And one kind of was putting some training together. Another one was really doing a lot of data entry. And, I thought about it. And the first thing I did is, the 3 of us got in a room, and I said, I know some learning development and I have some background, but this company. And I said, we got to do this together. That's how we're going to be successful. And it was perfect. I mean, one of those folks ended up coaching me really quickly, and it was right on. And it really helped me, because I was coming from a different perspective than an accounting firm. And she helped me see a different way I had to approach talking to the principals. So that's another big one, is, it's, they feel so responsible. And that's how they've been successful, kind of back to, they do what they did as a doer. Now in this role, they're not going to be successful. So they have to do it differently, which is scary, because you know how to do something, and now you're opening up what you feel responsible for to other people. And it's very scary. What I've learned over many years is, it usually turns out so much better because they bring their skills, they bring different ideas. What I was just explaining, that example, my role and our learning development team would have never been the success it was without all of us working together and bringing our different perspectives.
But that's some frontline leaders, you need to be very emotionally intelligent and mature to do that. So that's also a battle of, are they going to threaten? I haven't proven myself as a leader yet. Are they going to threaten how smart I look? So if you can get over that, it's good. But it's, but you need to know that the scoreboard has changed and the rules have changed. You don't go from doer to super doer. You go
Right.
You go from doer to superior, right?
Yeah.
Like it's, you can't just keep putting more on your plate without taking something off. leadership gluttony. Should we call that leadership gluttony?
Yeah.
You
Well,
got too much. It's not healthy, you know?
right. Well, and what you said, I mean, and that's a really good point. Because it is scary to open that up. So, usually in a group, there's at least one person that you really feel you can count on and that really can work with you. So, start with one. I mean, I don't recommend, don't get the whole group of 15 people together because that would suck. But if you got one person that you can even just, talk to, and they can give you some thoughts, and then maybe they take on a few of little pieces, that's a great place to start. Because you don't want to start with the whole group. It is too difficult. And especially if that individual has different strengths than you, that can be really helpful because together you can move things forward.
Yep. Complimenting, knowing people's strengths is like number one.
Yeah.
Using them. What can get tricky though too, Gayle, because sometimes the people you mentioned you're managing your peers. You also might be managing someone who also wanted your job and they didn't get the promotion you did.
Yep.
So there's like some conversations to be had, right? Like, okay, you wanted this job. I actually got it. I don't know what I'm doing. Can you
Right.
There's some nuances to that conversation.
Absolutely.
But building trust and consistency is, we could come up with all these random things, but every situation's so unique, right?
Right. Exactly. And again, that's why I think starting with that one trusted person is helpful. And again, hopefully your boss is being a good coach for you as well, because that helps a lot, because you have lots of questions at this point, and somebody who can guide you in some of that can be really extremely helpful in building that. And it takes time. You're not going to be perfect at this for quite a while.
If ever, right? Like we never quite reach perfection. Yeah. Well, Gayle, as we're kind of wrapping up here, what kind of final thoughts was there? Because it's such great nuggets. There are so many parallels to sales, and the executives who are going to be watching this, they can think, okay, are we doing that in our leadership development programs? How can we make this better? How can we manage these transitions to set them up for wins right away, so that the trajectory, kind of gets further? These are really good, important things. So what final thoughts or things that you want to make sure that you kind of communicated?
Well, I think at the executive level, or even the manager level of these new leaders, one again is really, really understand yourself, what you expect from these folks. Take just a little time to really think about what are you expecting from them, and being able to say it fairly concretely. And again, maybe even help them by phasing it, so that, you kind of get them started with a few things and then help them build. And then, a weekly one-on-one with the manager, even a half an hour when they're getting started would be so helpful. Opening that up to, asking them to bring their questions, what they're struggling with, and again, we don't use the one-on-ones to make sure the product's getting out. We've got to use that time to help the leader be able to ask his questions and get some help and reinforcement. And then I think the last thing, and I know it is hard, but don't try to do it alone. There are so many people who can help you with even little bits of things. I got lots of stories about that, where, just have different people take on little pieces, and they usually are more than willing. Most people they want you to be successful. And so a lot of times we just don't ask for help, and that can make all the difference.
Yep. And being brave enough to say, I feel really confident in these areas, but I need some help here. And just, getting it, because the mistakes, if frontline leaders were trained the way they should be and got the support, and the organizations want to give the support. I've met a couple, not many though, we don't want them to see. It's about, do they have the time? Do they understand how long this process is? It's just like training new employees. It's a new role. They want them. So asking for help, because people want to help.
Yes. Absolutely.
Want to help. Yes. Well, Gayle, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can
Thank
people
you.
find you? Where can they reach out? Because you are a plethora of knowledge, and I want to make sure that the right manufacturing, and I'll take a few people that I know in the comments to make sure
Thank
that they
you.
watch this. But where can people find
Yes.
you?
Well, my website is www.gaylenoakes.com, and it's GAYLENOAKES. And you also can reach me directly at gayle@gaylenoakes.com. So happy to talk with anybody who just wants to even bounce around some ideas of how to move some of their new leaders forward.
Awesome. All right. Appreciate your time, Gayle.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Rebecca.